several organizational issues. If you stop hearing me, please write to questions or to chat window. And if there will be lots of people who can't hear me, I will call to support and will try to fix the problem. At least I will stop the webinar and try to fix it. But if this issue is arised by 1, 2, or 3 people, it will probably mean that the problems are on your side. From time to time, I'm going to read your questions. And if it is very easy to answer during the webinar, I will do it. If not, if it requires some details from myself, then I create a question answering session. I will record it. I will record my answering to your questions in audio mode and then share it with everybody. Presentation and recording of this webinar will be also shared with you. I probably do it tomorrow or on Monday, but I hope it will be done very fast because now I'm doing it by myself and sharing it in my LinkedIn profile. It is the fastest way to do it because in order to upload it to Luxoft servers, it can take some time from us. So the recording will be provided of the webinar and the presentation. And if you have any problems during the session, you will write it into chat or questions window. And if there are any technical problems, you will also notify me about it. So about myself, I work at Agile Practice. I work as Agile coach and career coach. I have some hobbies, some interests, and also I have quite long experience in IT. I was a project manager, a program manager, and now I mostly do Agile coaching. The agenda of our today's session. First of all, we will talk about capacity, the number of ideal hours available during next sprint or next iteration if you are not familiar with Scrum terminology. Sprint, it means iteration, it means some period of time. Velocity, it is a number of story points completed during previous sprint or previous iteration during previous release cycle. Requirement stability index, percentage of requirements changed in the current sprint. Burndown chart, visual representation of story points or work units or functional points, anything that you count the value with of your product. And also I will speak a bit about necessity to log time into Jira or any other time tracking system that you use on your project. So capacity. And even before I go to speak about any metrics, I would like to note that whenever you would like to gather metrics, you should be aware how you're going to use it. Because if you don't know how you're going to use it, then why are you going to spend your time to gather it? It's like measuring your temperature and doing nothing about it. If we measure our temperature or if we measure our weight, we would like them to do something with it. Because if we just doing measuring, we're just wasting our time. So if you decided to gather some metrics that you learned on this webinar or from some other sources, just make sure you understand why you're doing it, why you're doing this and what you're going to do with the numbers that you get. So capacity. Capacity is a number of ideal hours, is a number of perfect hours, is a number of clean hours available during next sprint, next iteration, next release cycle. Capacity is our prognosis. It's our planning ahead. We probably need these ideal hours in order to understand how much work we can deliver during these ideal hours. From my experience and experience of the teams that I'm working with as Agile coach, I see that a usual developer don't work more than 5 hours per day. Sometimes we're getting numbers like 5 and 5 or 6 hours a day, but usually people don't work like 7 or even 8 hours. Yes, we are in office for 8 hours, but we don't do useful and valuable work for the product during this time. And it's very easy to see this while calculating the capacity. I will show you a bit further on the next slide how the calculation can be done. Why you can also need capacity. You can probably need it in order to distribute the task efficiently between all team members, because capacity is calculated beforehand, before you start your work. And if you see that some developers are on vacation, some developers probably will be in some business trips and will not be available for the team, you will probably need to make some knowledge sharing from them to the other team members in order they will be able to make their tasks in the best way. So when you're doing capacity calculations, you will see how many members of your team and who it is going to be not present in the next sprint or during next iteration. And it will help you to do the precise planning to meet the expectations at the end of the sprint. If you calculate capacity in ideal hours, in clean hours, it will mean that you should make estimation of your work also in ideal hours, not in so-called dirty hours, in order to map then capacity on the number of hours of estimation. Capacity is like a bucket where you put your tasks into. If your capacity of 100 hours and you have estimation of tasks for 150 hours, it will mean you will not be able to take these 50 additional hours. You will be able to put in the bucket only these 100 hours. And if a client is asking for you to take more tasks, then you can show him or her your calculation of capacity and tell them just to make this accurate, to make the sprint planning more accurately. So how to calculate capacity actually? Here is the spreadsheet. Probably some of you seen this spreadsheet from my post in LinkedIn and in Burndown, where there is some details on it, and I'm going to communicate you these details. So first of all, you need to know your team. Here is your team structure. There is some developers, there is some QA people. Then you need to know some schedule, so calendar numbers. Then you would like to know who will present and who will absent. 0 means like absent, and you mark it to visualize it. Also, some teams don't include in the ideal hours the hours of the last day of the sprint, when developers can't do actually development, because the testers then should be able to check it while it is the end of the sprint, and there will be no time for QA to check after developers. So we not calculate the developers' hours in ideal hours, the hours of the last day of the sprint. During this time, developers can write some documentation, can prepare some after testing, can probably look through requirements for the next sprint, but they don't do the development itself. So that is why we are not including it into our ideal hours. General quantity of hours. It is actually all hours available minus absent of unpresent people and minus this last day of the sprint hours. So we have for two weeks sprint, we have 72 hours mostly for developers and for a bit less for one of the QA person, because he is absent on 2 days of the sprint. After this, we exclude all hours of the meetings. In Scrum, you have some habitual meetings, some usual meetings, like Scrum planning, you have Scrum retrospective, you have stand-ups, you have review, you have product backlog refinement sessions. So you should exclude it. Probably, you also have some other meetings with your client, some status meetings, Maybe you have some technical meetings if you are a technical lead. Maybe you have some integration meetings with some third-party teams. So you should also calculate it in here. Then you get this number and you're going to multiply it on load factor. We will talk a bit later about what is included in load factor, but load factor, it is actually the time of how much the person can do work on the sprint. For instance, if we look at this person, it has 0.1 load factor. It means that this person is available only on 10%. And this person, the first one, is available on 40% during the sprint. It means the availability for the valuable for product tasks. We will see in details what is included and excluded from load factor, and I can show it to you here. So, ideal hour, it is the activities that are included in ideal hour, it is the activities that is directly connected to the person work. For instance, it can be reading of specification, it can be development of database, it can be building of the project, it can be development, some testing, or doing bug fixing. It is actually what is included in the work that brings value to the product. And there is some additional set of, tasks that probably is not directly bring value, but it brings value, but indirectly. And for your project, you should have these two lists of tasks. How to create it? You can write it with your team members. You can sit in a room and prepare the list of the activities that you personally and each team member is doing the same, doing during the week, or doing during the day. And in such a way, you can get a list of activities where you spend your time. And then you separate this list of activity into two lists, which are directly influencing your valuable work for the product, and which is influenced indirectly, like knowledge transfer and sharing. For instance, some team member came to other team member and the person started doing some mentoring of this person, answering questions, or some bug fixing after testing. For instance, you did bug fixing already, it goes to QA, but QA bring you back this task and say, hey, it's not ready, please do bug fixing again. Probably it can be some sanity check when you sit together with QA and you check your code, your functionality all together with QA, and QA is telling you whether it is right or wrong. You can do it before the testing itself. Probably you run some story tests, or you do some unit tests, you create some unit tests. So it is up to you what to include in both sections, but you should be aware where your team and where yourself is spending your time. When you got these two lists of information, you can come back to the calculation of capacity and see that some of your team members can't work on project for more than 50% or for more than 75%. And for instance, these two people who are working only for 10%, probably they're technical leads or project architectures, right? They can be doing lots of knowledge transfer. They can be doing lots of mentoring and sharing. Also, some time can be spent on merging. If your project is very complex, you can also spend lots of time on project building and have some problems that you need to resolve with it. And it can be also not included in load factor, but it depends. If you have a project engineer who is responsible for project building, it will mean that it is his primary responsibility to do project building, right? But if this activity of project building and fixing problems with project building is spread around all team members or is of technical lead responsibility, it means that it will be included in load factor, not in ideal hours. So you calculate it per person individually, this load factor number. You come here and you multiply these burst numbers. And now you can get their hours that are spent by a person, that is, a person is available for the sprint. So some people are available for 25 hours per sprint, some only for 6 or 7 hours per sprint. Then you also distract the 15 hours of general buffer for the team. It is the time for switching between tasks, the time for coffee, the time while person probably is reading some news just in order to relax a bit after doing some complex tasks. Different teams can have different numbers here, but you see, people can't work for like several hours without getting some rest, at least for 10 or 15 minutes. So you can include this team buffer for your team, and it can be like 5%, it can be 20%, it can be 10%. You should be able to explain your management and your client what this buffer is including and why it is including of 15% or 5%. In our case, for this particular team, it was explained to the management why it is 15. What you can also include in the capacity, for instance, if you have juniors on your project, if you have low-level skilled people, if you have very big difference between highly skilled people and low-level skilled people, you can also include here some coefficient and multiply or extract this coefficient from the ideal hours. But you should track all these coefficients and update it on regular basis, because people are becoming more skillful when some time passed, and you should be able then to update their numbers. So when you did all these calculations, you are getting like average time spent per person per day. You can see these numbers here, and you have also the numbers availability of the person per sprint. You can calculate Java developers capacity, Deutsche Bank database engineers capacity, general development capacity, general QA capacity. If you have, for instance, auto QAs, people who are doing auto tests on the project, who do some automatization of tests, you can also have a separate column for them. And in such a way, you see the capacity of your team, you bring it into your planning session, your release planning session, sprint planning session, iteration planning session, and you map it to your estimation of the tasks. In such a way, your estimations became more expectable. Let me see to the questions, if we have some. Okay, yes, there is some questions. There is some comments. Yes, you can agree and cannot agree that developer is doing 5 or 6 or 7 hours per day of valuable work, but in order to make sure, you should do your own calculations. You should see what is your own ideal hours capacity for a day or for a week of a sprint. And in such a way, you can understand and do your planning accurately. So it is not about like philosophical discussion or theoretical discussion about how much people should work. You should get your own numbers and then it map to your estimations. And then at the end of the sprint, you should see how you meet your estimations. How do you determine load factor value? Is it experimental and specific for different people? Yes, it is specific for different people, and yes, it is experimental. First, you just make an assumption during your first sprint or first iteration, and then you base on your experience, like we do always in Scrum. Isn't this buffer double counting? Is ideal hours already probably excluded by his time? Ideal hours buffer is not a double counting. It is for the whole team. Load factor is individual number. Meetings are also for the whole team, but buffer, it is for the whole team. We see that we need it in order to make our estimations accurately. Should we calculate general buffer from previous column or from general meetings? Actually not. we would like to make our capacity calculation as transparent as possible. So we don't want to include this general buffer into meetings, because actually it is not meetings. It can be some one-to-one meetings, or it can be some, how to say, some meetings that were organized like urgently, like several people are gathering together and start discussing something. We can't say that it is actually a meeting. It is a discussion, but it can be included in this buffer for the team, not in the general meetings of the team that are scheduled ahead, that are known by all the team. I mean, when you say general developer work 5 hours, those 3 hours of non-working is actually for coffee, task switching, tasks. No, when I'm saying that the developer is working, the regular developer is working for 5 hours, I mean these 5 hours is like here. And it is time not for only for coffee, for task switching, it is also time for load factor. It is here. It can be spent also on these activities. This 3 hours, like 8 minus 5. And it is hours are also for general meetings. So it is not like for coffee only, but coffee is also included into it. Okay, let's go further and talk about velocity. So capacity, as you understand, it is calculated in hours, and it is prognosis capacity, and it is calculated ahead. And velocity, on the opposite, is calculated based on our experience. It is calculated based on what we got after the sprint is finished, after the iteration is finished. And it is calculated in story points, or in work units, or in functional points, in any valuable pieces of functionality that you provided to your client. So we calculate the general number of story points that we did during previous sprint or sprints. It is better to calculate velocity not only once on one sprint, but to have some statistics on 3, 5, 7 sprints, in order to have this number, again, more accurate and more real life. You can also use velocity for planning, but together with capacity. You, for instance, your team is doing 100 story points per sprint, and you can take the user stories for this number of 100 story points. And you have, for instance, capacity of 200 hours per sprint. But if you use only velocity and you don't know your capacity, New Year holidays can come, summer can come, and some developers are go for vacation, and your capacity will reduce. While if you're not using your capacity and don't see your capacity, you can have risks taking only tasks based on your velocity, and in such a way you will not see that your team is reduced significantly, like it is happening during the summer holidays and during the new year. So you should use both numbers, capacity and velocity altogether, to make your planning more accurately. What you can also do with velocity, you can make a trend of how you are improving the delivery of story points to the client, of functional story to the client. Actually, how you're delivering the value to the client is increasing. For instance, during one sprint, you can make prognosis and take user stories for 26 story points. Actually, lots of teams, first of all, they're making estimation in story points of user stories. But when they split and break down the user stories into tasks, they start making estimation in tasks. So they're actually making double estimation and making double calculation and making prognosis. It will help them at least to meet more or less their estimations and to manage the expectations of the client. So you do estimation of user stories in story points because it is done on high level when you don't know the details of the requirements. But when the details become more clear to you, you can start splitting down the user stories and making subtasks or tasks out of it. And in such a way, you can make the estimation then in hours when you have the information necessary for this. But when you do estimation only in story points, or you would like to remain on more high level, for probably you need this information for your client and he or she don't want to go into details, into hours. So you can make some prognosis in story points. And actually some contracts are organized in such a way when client is paying for story points. And in such a way, client would like to see such a chart in order to see how we are probably improving our delivery, or when we have the due date, we would like to be sure that, for instance, for April, we will be able to deliver nearly 200 story points. It is the general number of story points delivered during all this period. So you can see that this team is more or less is meeting their prognosis in story points. And they try to remain it in such a way, because it is important when we commit on something to deliver it exactly in such a way. So it is all about velocity. I'm going to see your questions again. Okay, no questions about velocity. Good. We are going to requirement stability index. Requirement stability index is a number on how much your requirements were changed during the sprint or from the beginning of the sprint. It is up to you from what time you start measuring the instability of your requirements. Probably you start measuring the instability of your requirements after the planning meeting in Scrum. Or you would like to start measuring instability of your requirements 2 days before the planning, because you have product backlog refinement sessions and you would like to make sure that all requirements are ready for product backlog refinement sessions. And you start counting the instability of your requirements from product backlog refinement sessions. Or probably you know that when you start the sprint, your requirements are never ready. And you say, okay, if we have this situation like this, then let's start the calculating instability of our requirements after 1 week of the sprint. So we would like to make sure that after 1 week of the ongoing sprint, all our requirements are ready. How it is calculated? So you take total number of original business requirements, for instance, at the beginning of the sprint. Then you add number of requirements changed till some date, number of requirements added to the scope of the sprint, number of requirements deleted from this scope. And you divide it on total number of original requirements, the first number, right? Here is an example. You should try to keep this number very near to the 1, because if it is very near to the 1, it will mean that your requirements are not changing. If this number is starting growing, it means your requirements become more and more unsteady. And for your team, for your product owner, for your client, for your management, you should determine, you should identify the number that you're going to escalate. The number, for instance, is instability index of your requirements is 1 and 5, right? You can say that we don't want to start the sprint with such a number. We don't want to start release or iteration with such a number. So it is up for your team to define this limit. Maybe for some teams it is fine to have like 2 here or 108 here. So it is again up to you and up to your team, but everybody should know what you think is green number, what is yellow number, and what is red number. When the escalations, when the problems should be identified and arise. And definitely this number should be communicated to product owner, to client, to someone who is, and to business analysts, to someone who is working with requirements. And you should discuss this requirement stability index number with these people who are providing you the requirements. You can't do it just by your own team without engaging these people into these activities. There are some questions coming. Let me see. Changes in requirements is quite a thin topic. Do you measure the influence for changes? I mean, changes in caption and in algorithms or different changes. We don't measure in teams with whom I'm working with, but you can start doing it. If you have very complex requirements and they are of very different level of complexity, you definitely should have some coefficients here. And depending on these coefficients, you can start doing the calculation in a bit different way. It is up for you to decide, but at first I could recommend to use some simple formula to see how it works for you and then do some corrections of it. Because you can start doing very with very complex formulas, and then you will spend lots of time on simplifications of this formula and not actually on the taking value from this formula. So start with these and see how you need to update it in order to meet your project. The next question. How do we deal when we receive a requirement for a change in one or several story points from previous sprint? How do we deal when we receive a requirement for a change in one or several points from previous sprint? It is not actually about stability index. It can be calculated, actually it can be calculated in the stability index. You just put it into number of requirements added. You can add it just as a new requirement because it doesn't mean, it doesn't matter from it, is it from previous sprint or from next sprints. You just add it as added. And whenever, just remember, whenever you do any in-scoping into the sprint, you should probably do some descoping, because when it meets your capacity and you do in-scoping, that is fine. But if it stops meeting your capacity and doing some in-scoping, you should do descoping. But in order to show the client that you are full, that your sprint is full, and you have all the tasks for your sprint, you need to calculate capacity or velocity or both. And after this, you can do in-scoping and descoping and visualize it. One more question. And requirements can be different in sense of their estimation. Is somehow this is considered in requirement stability index? In this formula, no, it is not considered. It is simple and it is as is. But again, you can add something to this. You can modify formulas as you like in order to meet your project needs. But again, start with something simple, see how it works for you, and then start simplifying it a bit. When you do some when you're gathering some statistics, and in order to gather some statistics, you need numbers. And in order to get these numbers, you probably need to log your work into task tracking systems. And you can then bring the logging of your time into retrospective or lessons learned session and see probably why these or those issues happened. For instance, some team found out that they usually late with their UI tasks. They make a spreadsheet like this, and they see from these spreadsheets what are tasks that was very a lot underestimated. They took much more time than it was at first decided on. So in order to do such spreadsheet, you need some numbers. And when you're looking at this spreadsheet, you're looking for their patterns. It doesn't mean if you was incorrect about one or two tasks, probably that is fine. But if you see that half of the tasks in your sprint was estimated incorrectly and you spent more or less time on these tasks, you will see what type of these tasks, what these tasks are about. And probably you can find out, like this team, that they are always late with UI tasks. And probably they need some UI engineer into their team. And probably they need some part-time shared resource of UI in order to make their estimations and their work on these tasks more effective. You can also find out from the statistics that you are gathering that you spend lots of time on virtual machine while you're working on virtual machines. And some clients are demanding that people are working on virtual machines, on so-called S-DOTS machines. And you can calculate how much time you spend on waiting answer from these machines while doing some operations on it. And it is also the number to include or exclude from your capacity calculation. You can see that also there can be some bottlenecks in testing. For instance, you can see that most tasks are usually developed by the end of the sprint, but very little of them are tested. And in such a way, you again can go to your management and say, we need more QA resources. And at least when you show some numbers, it will be more easier for management to provide arguments for the clients and say why more resources are necessary. Because when you just, without any information, come to your management and say, we need more QA engineers, he asks you why you need it, and you say, I feel it. Like, it's very difficult to deal with feelings when you're talking about business, when you're talking about money. It's better to use some numbers for this. That is why probably you need to gather the statistics. Some people are gathering statistics by people and see how many story points each person is doing during the sprint. It can happen that one person in the team is doing for 10 story points and everybody else is doing for 1, 2, or 3 story points. It is a real case situation. And then the question is why it is so. Why someone in 15 times more effective than other people? Probably because other people are overloaded with something. Or probably because the person who is working for 15 story points per sprint are actually spending for 12 hours during a day per work. So the load on the team should be more or less similar. And with these statistics, you can see it. You can also see how much hours have small underestimation or have very big overestimation, and see what are these tasks are about. Maybe if it is one task, there is no problem, but with most of the tasks are always have overestimations. You can then show to the team this spreadsheet and go task by task, going deep into it and understanding why they start having such much time to perform. But again, you should look for patterns. You should find these 20% of the cases that can bring you the 80% of value. So you should fix something that is really very harmful for your project. If there is some little underestimations or overestimations, no problems with it. So you're more or less meeting your expectations. And again, in how much hours you're underestimating or on how much hours you're overestimating. Underestimation is also bad because client is paying money for it and you did your work, faster, right? But it will mean that probably you didn't did your work faster, but you just did wrong estimations. So you just very wrong at your estimations. That is why you are doing your work faster. In Scrum, it is very important to do the estimations and work accurately, to be able to do planning precisely, because it helps business to manage their business and to be in time with their deliverables and with their commitments. And in such a way, you build trust with a person. When you say that you will do this scope by this time, and you're actually delivering exactly this scope exactly by this time, the person become relying on you. But if you are telling that you will deliver this scope and every time you deliver more, the person can start asking you why you're not taking more and deliver more and commit on more and not just making under commitments all the time. Some questions, let me see it. The greater the requirement stability index, the greater the stability of requirements. No, actually not. The greater the requirement stability index, the worse, the more instability is. When it is 1, I mean, when 10, you 10 divided on 10, it brings you 1. It means that no requirements were changed, no requirements were added or deleted. So to have 1 here is good. To have more than 1, it is bad, but this badness depends on your project. I mean, you can say that for your project, it is very bad to have 1 and dot 8 stability index. But for some projects, they say, okay, we're very unstable and we can cope with this instability. It can be even 2 for us here. So the more requirements index is, the worse it is. It should be 1 here. How easily figure out underestimated tasks if we use story points estimation only? Then you can gather statistics in story points as well. So first you do estimation in story points, and then you will see how much story points were done during the sprint. When people are closing their tasks, you will see how actually many story points were done. And in such a way, you can see you were committed on 50 story points and your team done only 30 story points. It means that for some reason, 20 story points are missing. And you can again go deeper into statistics and see where these story points are missing. Maybe testing were not done on these tasks, and in Scrum, the tasks that were not tested are not counted into the sprint results. So, or maybe some story points were not done because lots of bug fixing, it means problems about quality, or some story points were not done because requirements were changing all the time. So you can also calculate it in story points. But again, if you measuring something in some numbers, you should make estimation of it also in these numbers. So your capacity and your velocity should be able to meet the way you do the estimations. Next question. How can we calculate story points per person? In Jira, actually, yes, because several people can work on one and the same task, but they can write into comments in Jira how much story points they did on this task from their point of view. Let me see how it can be also done. When people are providing estimation in some teams, they are providing it already split it between QA engineers and between developers. And in such a way, after this, you can easily understand. If it was developer, he was doing some task, and after this, he put into comments the quantity of story points done. For instance, he committed, or the team of developers committed to do this task on 5 story points, but developer did this task for 3 story points. And he put it into this number into comments or in some other fields. You can have some custom fields in Jira. And then QA engineers start working on this task and also added some 2 story points into comments. But again, you should have for this, in order to make the comparison, you should have at first the numbers of estimations. The team of developers committed on 5 story points to do this task, and QA engineers are committed on 2 story points spent on this task. And after this, you can see how much was calculated. Definitely, it is easier to do it in hours, because in hours, Jira has a mechanism of reporting hours into Jira, and it is much more easily. But you can find your workaround to make the same with story points. We have also information of Burndown chart here, and Burndowns, it is actually the visualization of your progress on how you're burning your hours or your story points, how you're burning, how much work you do on the project while you're moving forward on a timeline. So capacity and velocity is like final numbers. and stability requirement syntax, it is a final number. Burn down, it is a number that shows you the progress. So it is about the process, not about the result, while capacity and velocity is a lot about the result. You can have several burn down charts on your diagrams. In Scrum, we usually have only two. In Scrum, we have ideal. It means how we would like to go through the sprint in order to come to some release date, to some due date, to the end of the sprint. It is on this vertical line you see the number of story points or work units that are making burnt down during the time, and here you see the timeline, right? You can have here some weekends. There is no problem about weekends. You just calculate it as nothing is happens, like was no weekend here, no days here. You just calculate January 11 and then you go to January 13 and you continue drawing the line without calculating weekends. If you're not working on weekends, definitely. If you're working on weekends, then you calculate weekends as well. So here is the ideal line, and here is the line actually how it was done during the work. So at first, as you see, QA engineers plus dev engineers started doing their work, and then something has happened and they slowed down a bit because the time continued to go here forward, but the story point stopped being burned in such a fast range in order to meet the due date. So here you can see some increasement probably of tasks, or probably they slow down because something has happened on the project, probably someone got ill, or maybe some requirements were clarified a bit detailedly and people got newer information and it requires more strength for them to complete. So, and here you see that they are not meeting their requirements here. As I already said, there can be different lines here. There can be lines for QA people. You can see QA here, like the line is not going anywhere. Probably there are lots of bug fixing and QA just start testing something and then bringing it back to developers and then start testing again. Or probably QA were very busy with some regression testing or maybe with something else. So they were not able to do their work perfectly well and actually well. They were not in time for the sprint end of the day. You can also bring it onto your retrospective session or your lessons learned session and discuss why you have such situation. Where you else probably need different lines for QAs and for developers. Unfortunately, from time to time, we have different vendors who are working on one and the same project, right? And you can have QA team provided by another vendor, provided by another client or anybody else, but it is not your team. And you see that you're always in time with your deliverables. But the general line, QA plus dev, are always not in time with your deliverables. Probably then you should spread it into two lines like QA and developer and to see where is the problem. Actually, it is not Scrum way of doing such a stuff, because in Scrum you should count the whole team, speed, the whole team pace, but still you can, if you would like to see who is delaying the hours, who is delaying their story points at the value, you can spread the lines. And also, in order to see what is happening on these points where the line is go up or the line start going down, you can mark it in such a way. You do and you should do burn down charts on daily basis, and whenever something is happening like this, you can write down what it was. It was something was in-scoped and something was descoped, and you will see for exactly what is going on here. Usually, burn down is calculated at the beginning of the day, But in order to calculate it, you should again have work hours logged into task tracking system accurately. And when it is done, you can make the burn down by hands or by Jira, whatever you like, whatever is more convenient for you, and spread it between the whole to the team members, or you can bring it to your stand-up if you're using Scrum process on your project and discuss what is going on here. It is also good when all team members can draw burn down, when everybody understands how it is drawn, how it is created. You can do it in turn in your team. Not only Scrum Master or Manager can draw burn down. For instance, today it can be Alex, and tomorrow it can be Michael, and then it can be Olga or Anne, right? Everybody knows how to draw it, and there is some tone where people are doing it, and in such a way people are more involved in the project. Because if only one person is doing it, it can happen that no one is caring what is going on here, and burn down is going into a very strange way, like here, right? And no one is caring. Only managers in panic about it. But everybody say, burn down, what it is, all these lines are all about. Again, in order to make metrics effective, you should explain the metrics value to the all interested parties and involve people in gathering these metrics and analyzing these metrics together. One more question. How do you think, is it valuable option to create separate tasks for QAs for better tracking? Actually, I don't think so, because I think that the team should work as a whole unit and be effective as a whole unit. But again, if you have different vendors doing development and different vendor is doing testing, and you are sure that you're providing all your commitments in time and someone else is always delaying commitments, your team can become very demotivating, because they're not successful because of some external factors, because of some external situation. So probably in such a way it is better to spread the lines and to see where is the problem, then bring this problem to the people who you think is the source of this problem and discuss with them why it is happening in such a way. Probably they can say, guys, we would like to test in time, but you are bringing your requirements to us at the end of the sprint, and we are always not ready with testing, because we need to have 1 week, or we need to have 10 days, or we need to get your requirements in 5 days before the sprint in order to be ready with it. So sometimes it is good for transparency to go deep into detail of some metric. A question of Russian, guys, please write questions in English, because I'm reading it aloud. Okay, let me translate. So should you split the work between test or between developer work when doing estimations? You can do it in different way, but in my practice, all of the teams are splitting down the work between QA and between developers, because developers can't estimate the tasks of QA. They don't know how it will be tested, and the testers don't know how it will be developed. That is why the testers can't estimate the development work. But again, in Scrum, all the team members should more or less be so-called T-shaped specialists. They should have very deep knowledge in some area and also some superficial knowledge, some knowledge in some other areas. If all the team is working together for a long time, if they have more or less similar level of skillfulness and know how to do testing and how to do development, how to do business analysis, they probably can do estimations, not only for themselves, but for their team members from the different specialization. But from my experience, what I see is on all projects, people are splitting the estimations between developers and between testers. Let's go a bit further. So if you have several teams working on one project, you can create burn downs for them separately and then can make a general burn down. So separate burn downs can be then combined combined into one burn down, and you can see the general trend. Here you can see also on this example the burn up, and burn up help you to see how your project scope is increasing. So how it is increasing in story points. So it is becoming more and more story points. But also it is enough just to use on the burn down to track your progress. You can have here like 4 teams or 6 teams and then making the combinations. Or again, you can start with just combination, and then if there are any problems, you can start splitting it into between teams, as we did for QAs and devs. I would like to show you questions. Before we go to next slide. What is story point? Is it ideal hours? Guys, can't explain you on this webinar what is story points because it is actually how to say, a story for the next several webinars. What I can say about story points, it is a relative number. It is, for instance, if someone is asking me how much it will take from you to go from building A to building B, because in Kyiv office we have in this office where I am, there are 2 buildings, A and B, and someone is asking me, hey Svetlana, how much it will take from to go from building A to building B. And I can say, it is the same like going from the 5th floor of building A to the 1st floor of building A. And the person can say, okay, I got it. So I'm not giving the person the time, I'm not giving the person the distance, I'm not giving actually anything to the person, but just the relation to some other number that is known for him. So if the person knows what is the story point of what is the user story of one story point, it means that the next story point of 2 story points is just 2 times more complicated than the user story of one story point. But again, it is the topic for another webinar or another workshop. At the end of the session, can you please show again the first slides? If I have time, if not, you will get this presentation tomorrow or on Monday together with the recording of webinar. So you will definitely will be able to see all it is. Burndown chat, it is for client also or only for internal project management? It is for client as well. And it is good when you can show it for client and discuss it with him or her on daily basis, because then the client can see your trend, how you are going through your deliverables, and you all together can do something about any problems that are happening. Or if you see that you're under load, the client can give you more tasks. So it is good to make it transparent for everybody in the team if you don't have anything to hide. And actually it is very bad when someone has something to hide on the project. Okay, some people need to go. We have just some, as I called, horoscope on burn downs, just for you to have some fun. So it is actually, when you see such burn down, it is how to identify what the team is in front of you when you see their burn down. So if you come to some team and see on the wall the burn down like this, you can see it is ideal team. And here you can see the description of the burn down, and here's the corrective actions. Here you don't need it to do anything. And it is great team. So you can see if you see the burn down of this shape, you can also do some corrections about it to make it ideal team. Usually the burn down looks like this. It is a typical team. People are a bit relaxing at the beginning of the sprint and then start working a bit harder in order to be, it's like about exams at university. So you're relaxing for some months and then you start working harder in order to be in time with your preparation of exams. You can bring your burn down and discuss the problems with it and discuss what to do, the work around, how to improve it. And this team, it is called Let's Have a Rest. They are always underestimating their tasks. They're always overestimating their tasks, and that is why they are always have less work. This line, it means how much story point they should take, but you always take a bit less than necessary, or they take the same amount, but they're always overestimating it. Um, Boom, it is too late. It means we were tracking, and then we saw that it is too late. Actually, we should start questioning our pace even here in the middle of Burndown. But we start questioning it at the end when it is too late. So the main point of Burndown is to start doing something beforehand, before the end of the sprint, because at the end of the sprint you can do nothing about your Burndown and your deliverables. Boom, it's too late. It means we did our work pretty early and we didn't take any new tasks. But we should start taking new tasks here. We should show it to our product owner and say, hey, we are underloaded. Please provide us some tasks because we don't know what to do. And we will be very early with all our tasks by the end of the sprint. And the next is called management is coming. It means Burndown was going horizontally, and then someone came and say, guys, what is going on with your Burndown? You are late. And they say, no, we're actually not late. And they just completed the Burndown as is. One more, do your duties. It means that no one is caring about Burndown. It's probably people start using Scrum. Someone said it to them that they need Burndown and then start drawing some line somewhere, and it is like it is. There are other Burndowns like zero effect, probably sprint is not started. Up to the sky, probably the scope is always adding, and no one is working on this project, but someone is drawing Burndown. And this is very strange Burndown. But again, you should start drawing your own Burndowns and then identify your own problems and your own ways around. I will probably ask you to stay with me for 4 or 5 minutes more. I will, especially if you ask some questions. I would like to know if the planning shown at the beginning of the webinar can be made from Jira. The planning show, no, capacity, if you are talking about capacity metrics, it is done manually, it is done by hand. We will not find the way how to do it in Jira. What tools are used to create these charts? It is done in Excel mostly. If you're talking about Burndowns, it is done, we are mostly doing it in Excel. It is more convenient to do it in such a way, not in Jira. In Jira, you can do it in Jira, for instance, like this one, but I know that most of the team that I'm working with are doing it in Excel. It is easier to edit it, to add some coefficients to it, to add some formulas to it. But you can try to do it in Jira. With Jira, there is a problem. If people are logging their time accurately, then it is fine. It can be created in Jira. But if not, then in Jira you will have a mess. But when you're doing it in Excel, at a particular time, you can go to all your team members, ask the numbers, gather the numbers from them, put it into Excel, and Excel will write you the correct Burndown chart. Okay, so it is actually all, and I answered all the questions. If you have more questions, please email it to me. I'm always answering questions via emails, and I would like to show you some information on further reading and watching about metrics in general. In May, I'm planning to have overview of estimation in functional points. It is actually also a bit about metrics and mostly a bit of estimations. If you're familiar with these function points concept, you'll probably find out something new from this webinar. If you are not familiar, it is also good to visit this webinar. It is another concept different from story points concept, how to make the estimations in function points based on your function requirements. I'm going to have this webinar in May, but you can already register to it. The date and time can be changed because May is quite far away from January, but you can register, and if there are any changes, we will send you a new invite. But still, I think it can be very valuable webinars because there is very little information about function points, but some of our clients, of lots of clients, already starting to use these function points to measure us, to measure our progress, to measure our deliverables, and probably it can be valuable for you also to know how to make these calculations. If you asked to do it, you in such a way will be able to do it or to know where to go, what to read in order to do it. Also, I would like to suggest you to watch my webinar, The Power of Visualization. It is a recording of webinar, and you can find it in this article. It can help you to make the visualization of the gathered requirements, of the gathered information. You can see how you can visualize the data that you are getting, because sometimes, as you can see here, when we were talking about login time into Jira, this spreadsheet is quite difficult to read. You don't get the main ideas about it, but these charts, these pie diagrams are quite easy to understand. So the webinar, The Power of Visualization, is also talking about different types of data visualization. Also, you can read my post about calculation of capacity. We in detail discussed capacity on this webinar, but there is a post with also details. If you didn't got it from the webinar, you can go to this post. Also, there is in Russian a post about how to manipulate with diagrams and how to see the fraud. If someone is cheating in diagrams, how to see it. And also there is this webinar in Russian that I already provided to you in English. So if you would like to, for some reason, to listen it in Russian, there is a Russian webinar. I also inviting you to the trainings. It will happen, the upcoming trainings from Agile Practice. We will not talk a lot about metrics in facilitation training, but we will talk here about estimation strategies, because it also provides information how to facilitate plannings, how to facilitate product backlog refinements. For Luxoft employees, the link is for registration is here. For non-Luxoft, it is here. For Luxoft employees, it is free. For non-Luxoft, unfortunately, the training is not free. It will happen next week. So if you would like to join, just do it. And there will be also trainings in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and it is Agile Fundamentals. It is about fundamentals, concepts of Agile, basics of Agile, and here will be also examples of estimations on these trainings. It will be this training, both these trainings will be on Russian, and it is certified trainings. It is, you will get international certificate of AC Agile if you successfully and actively present on these trainings. If you would like the trainings to be organized in Sofia, Bucharest, Krakow, Wrocław, Minsk, contact Agile Education, and we will be glad to bring your trainings on that locations. So some questions, probably I will answer these questions privately. I will stand a bit later in this GoToWebinar platform and answer the questions that are coming, because it is 7 minutes and I need to let people go. So thank you, everybody. Please write your feedback to me, because I'm interested in improving my webinars. Thank you all for coming, and goodbye. Have a good day.